So now when people are talking about a Jungian approach to tarot,
Mhm.
this must just be an extrapolation from Jung's teachings, because it doesn't sound like he really went that deep into uh, analyzing the tarot. So
Right.
how do you take a Jungian approach to tarot?
Um, Lots of different ways, but one of them is the deep interest in mythology, looking at how myths and folklore correspond with different psychic states that we have, and how you can see those themes being played out in the individual. So as soon as you start associating particular myths or aspects of myths to the different cards, you've got an idea of how that archetypal mythic storyline is working in your life. And once you see that, you also have a sense of, if you don't work it very deliberately, that it's probably going to progress along that same line. So it's one way of forecasting the future. You know, you're obviously working in this line, and if you keep going exactly as you have been, this is where the story goes, and therefore some aspect, metaphoric aspect of that is the direction. It's kind of like you're on a train track, and that's where the train track is going to head towards. Um, but everything works at a different level because metaphor is more abstract than the literal. And so one of the things that you can do is work with the metaphoric level in order to use that energy, but not have it necessarily work out in killing your father and marrying your mother. What does that mean psychologically?
Hmm.
What do you have to do in terms of killing off some of the masculine aggressive energy and embracing more of the feminine energy? Or what do you do if you do that too much? Where Oedipus ended up blinding himself. So all of these kind of have metaphoric allusions, and if you work and uh, to understand and integrate the metaphor, you don't have to live out the physical in
Mm.
quite the same way. Not that everybody's going to go out and kill their father and marry their mother, but the understanding, finding the meaning in it, transforms the whole experience. So it allows you to change the vibrational energy level that you're working with in terms of a myth. Okay, that's one level. And of course, all the Jungians love to write about the myths and the psychological significance of them. So we've got Marie-Louise von Franz and many, many more that um, you know, go through very specifically and show us how to work with these myths and the symbolism in them that we find on the cards. So it's like you can follow along and go, oh, that symbol, yes, and that one, oh, that's part of a sequence. The tower is the Rapunzel fairy tale. Rapunzel, let down your hair from the tower. And eventually she gets thrown out of the tower, as well as her lover. Her hair gets caught and he falls to the ground. So you can follow that myth
Mm.
through different things. And what does that mean to be in the tower and to be isolated and to, go through, and the whole thing with hair, what does that mean? So that's the mythic level. The other level is the map of the soul, or the map of the psyche. And that is where Carl Jung identified different parts of the psyche, both the conscious and the unconscious. He was kind of a pioneer of the realm of the unconscious. And a book that was his journal was published a few years ago called The Red Book, which is the account of his inner journeys, his inner pioneer exploration of this unconscious realm. And you can go through and take your notes in tarot teas, as I call it, identifying different figures in his encounters with beings in the unconscious as figures in the tarot. So you can see those parallels. But his map talks about some concepts that had been there with prior um, psychologists that he then developed further or modified to fit his own pattern. Like there's the ego. And the ego isn't being egotistical. The ego is the me, myself, and I. I want to do this. I choose to go there. You know, I am a teacher, I am a podcast announcer, interviewer. All of those things are what the ego says and does. Um, and so it's our sense of basic sense of I. And we're working towards expanding that sense of the ego into a much larger, greater sense, which you call the self. And an aspect of the self, it can be seen as kind of a God self within ourselves, because it has far greater awareness and power to transform and change our experiences in our lives. So, and then there's the persona. The persona is the mask, because that's a Greek term which means mask, and was part in the Greek theater, that it was the mask that people wore so that you could tell what part somebody was playing.
Mhm.
And so that's the part of ourselves that we present to other people. And interestingly, the K-pop, the Korean pop group BTS, their latest album is called Map of the Soul Persona, and all the songs on it are based on Carl Jung's ideas about the persona and what it means to be an idol, where that's how people know you, is only through these masks, and you know what it takes to keep those and present those, and the responsibilities and so on. So they really glommed onto that. Um, but understanding how that's different than the other parts. And then you go into the unconscious, and we have ideas that people are very familiar with, like the shadow. Well, Carl Jung was the main person who developed the idea that there is a shadow part of ourselves, which is something that we can often see in other people, but we don't recognize in ourselves. So things we blame other people for, and sometimes things that we admire in other people that we think are not in ourselves. That's called the bright shadow. And then there's the dark shadow, which is whenever you say, you know, oh, that person talks too much, and your friends are kind of looking at you going, yeah, yeah, you know, that person, you mean you? But you don't recognize it or see it. So one of the big tasks in Jungian psychoanalysis is to meet your shadow, and to, which is many aspects of the shadow, many, many aspects, and come to recognize those parts of yourself. So that's what Jung was doing in part in the Red Book, was meeting these different figures in the shadow. And so you've got a mother and father complex, which are based on your relationship with mother and father figures in your early life, that still keep commenting in your own head about things. And you don't even realize that that's not why you, or that's why you didn't go on to get a doctorate, because your father always said you could never make anything of yourself. So there's that inner voice, even if your father's no longer alive, saying those things. And so those are part of that shadow realm and aspect. And the inner child, that as you grow up, you tend to leave behind and forget the playfulness and um, the creative aspects that are there in the child. Um, and then there's many other aspects and things that are kind of there in almost everyone. Everybody is a racist in some way or another. All the people who say, oh, I'm not racist, immediately, you know, there's a shadow issue there. And if you want to explore that and you go deeply into it and come to understand what that means in your own life, then it opens so many doors and makes you more compassionate with other people.
Mm.
You know, it may not look like what we first think of when we think of racism, but when you really delve into it and take away the layers of it, you come down to a deep place in yourself where there's often shame and fear and obsessions. And those are all the things that can be opened up and befriended. It's not that they're cleared out. It's, you have to, like in the strength card where the maiden is um, embracing the lion in some way, there's that relationship between them. It's learning to embrace the things that most terrify you and come into a relationship with them. a meaningful relationship, and meaning is a big thing in Jungian psychology. So I went on and on. I'm sorry. Add whatever your insights are to that.
Untitled.